Your rights are my responsibility. A man has to decide that he's going to do something. Do not listen to your stupid classes.
Welcome to another episode of Timeless Dialogues. My name is Bill Roach, and today we are going to look at the very controversial issue of what should we do with transgender athletes in combat sports. Now, we recognize that this is an issue that's both in combat sports and outside of combat sports. In fact, if you look at the greater issue of all sports everywhere, you realize that this issue of biological males competing with females has become one of the most divisive things to occur within not only American society, but within Western society at large. However, this is something that's also been finding its way into, in particular, the martial arts world and the Brazilian jiu-jitsu community. And I think many people became familiar with this as the North American Grappling Association, NAGA, had this odd compromised sort of position where they were allowing individuals who were biological men to compete with biological women. And they received this massive pushback by people, and really by God's grace, they changed their entire position on the matter. Now, one of the things that we have to find is that the whole driving ideology behind this is people try to say, well, you know, we want to be an inclusive, inviting environment. We don't want to exclude anybody from our organizations. So in doing that, they're going to allow transgenders to compete. So what I want you to realize is that, you know, some of the largest organizations, we're talking IBJJF, ADCC, now NAGA, FUJI, as of right now, they're all opposed to it. But not all of them are opposed to it. And what I want you to see is this: it is not enough just to promise that a transgender will not go against a biological female. We cannot allow this into the sport. Believe me, as this whole ideology operates and how it's going to function, they will never be satisfied with this third way approach. And here's the whole reason why. You cannot negotiate with Marxists. Marxists will say, we like your third way approach now, but what about next year or the following year? They are like a virus that seeks to take over the entire body that it infects until they take over the entire organization. And that's the whole point. That's the reason that we can have no compromise on this. It's because their whole dynamic is revolution unto utopian power. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, well, this is a lot of, over talk and generalizations. We're just trying to include all different people into our group. And I really just want to say, you don't understand Marxism. You don't understand how these ideologies operate. Now, one of the things that I want to see here is before we dive into this, people might ask, what's your motivation for doing this? And I go back to the old Martin Niemöller sort of poem where he said this: first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So why am I speaking out about this? One, because it's affecting a sport and a martial art that I deeply love, and I'm going to speak out about it while I still have the chance. Two, as of right now, it has not directly affected me and my family, even though I know people who are participating in the world of combat sports, and they need to see the importance of this. So one of the things that I want us to see is a little bit of the background on it. Several sporting organizations have started to adopt this so-called transgender policy in order to provide an environment where people can feel really included. And we're going to talk about that later, why the idea of inclusion doesn't mean what you think it means. Remember, Marxists use postmodern double speak. In addition to it, figures such as Riley Gaines and several others have been pushing back against this movement because it clearly disrupts women's sports. Riley and others lost medals because biological men who are stronger and faster could swim faster. In addition, as it starts to go into combat sports, it's not just an issue of, they swim faster and they're stronger. Women are going to be literally injured because of this. There's a sheer fact of science and biology that men are stronger than women, and in the heat of competition, this is not going to end well. Now, in addition to it, much of this movement, and what I want you to see is that much of what's being drawn upon here is not just this idea of we want to give people a place to participate. Rather, it's drawing deep from the wells of what's known as critical theory to various spheres of life and education. It's really the application, it's the praxis of critical theory as it relates to critical queer theory. Now, what you need to see is that a lot of people are used to hearing about critical race theory, but there are a whole variety of critical theories. You got critical race theory, critical queer theory, you got critical fat studies. You've got a whole bunch of different ideologies that are all drawing from the same root of critical theory. And I want you to realize that what you're seeing here as it relates to this whole issue of should a transgender compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you're seeing the clear ideology of critical queer theory under the guise of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So what I want to do here is I want to give you just a few reasons for why Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu should reject this whole ideology outright. So the first one is this. Most organizations have adopted the same rule set and guidelines as the IBJJF, but they are departing from the standards laid down by the IBJJF when they adopt such a policy. So, for example, several organizations do not allow transgender athletes, NAGA, FUJI, ADCC, and the IBJJF. Now, some smaller organizations like Tap Cancer Out, under the guise of inclusion and using a third way approach, are going to say things like, you know, we're not going to allow a transgender to compete against a biological female, but we're going to create this category. We're going to allow this because we want to be an inclusive environment. Well, what you need to realize is first and foremost, you are really radically departing from the standard laid down from you by the largest governing organizations within Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In addition to it, this whole approach has been tried and failed before. NAGA tried this. NAGA initially developed a policy to allow transgender athletes to compete, but later changed their policy due to the fact that they received significant pushback and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community started to pull back from those various competitions. So when Tap Cancer must realize that what they're doing when they're giving us this third way approach is they're not being, loving and inclusive and gathering all people to have this diversity of representation in there. Rather, what they're doing is they are pushing critical queer theory onto their participants, and they're taking away their liberty to participate in an organization that is forcing this upon them. So what I want you to realize is that they are not only bucking the system, but they're doing so in the wave of the diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So here's the second reason. Any jiu-jitsu academy or tournament that caters to transgenderism must realize they are catering more to the DEI industry than to their very own base. Now, one of the key factors that you got to realize, like politically, on how all of this works is that you can never rid yourself of your base. If you're going to go out there and you're a fundraising organization and you're an organization that's trying to be a 501c3, you never tick off your base. These are the people that pay your bills. These are the people that show up at your tournaments. These are the people that show up at your banquets and your conferences and so much more. And when people start to do this, specifically 501c3s, what you have to see is that they are bucking their base for theory with a capital T, critical theory. The diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of regime, what you need to see at this. Diversity doesn't mean that we just want to have all these different people sitting at the table, having their place, having their conversation. Rather, what diversity means is that we're going to train people in critical consciousness. We want people who think according to critical theory. And by inclusion, they don't mean that, we're just going to include all of these different people, the transgenders and the people who are struggling from this racial oppression, or people who are struggling from fat studies and all the rest. We know what all of the literature is. If diversity means training in critical consciousness, inclusion means only including those people with critical consciousness. And then what does equity mean? Equity simply means the disruption and dismantling towards a communist utopia. And you go, well, where in the world would you get this? from all of the literature from the Frankfurt School and from Marcuse and other explicit Marxists that have spoken out on this particular issue. Now, some people are going to wonder, is this really the driving cause behind why some of these organizations are doing this? And I go, well, if you want me to point to literature, let's point to Tap Cancer Out. So let's look at their policy here. Notice what it says here. It says Tap Cancer Out transgender athlete policy. Tap Cancer Out is and always has been an inclusive tournament as we aim to fulfill our vision of giving every grappler the opportunity to fight for those in the fight for their lives. Their whole point is that we are fighting jiu-jitsu tournaments because people are battling the real reality of cancer in a fight for their lives. And they go on to say this: with regards to transgender athletes competing in a Tap Cancer Out event, we do work within a policy that strives to provide fairness, inclusivity, ding, 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 and safety throughout all of our divisions. And they start to qualify this. And the essence of so much of what they're trying to say is this, is that in their particular approach, their third way approach, they're saying, if you are a transgender biological male, so you're a guy that thinks you're a woman and you want to go compete, you need to go and notify them before the tournament. If everybody's okay with it, then you can compete. Or they're going to create sort of this position where you can compete with other transgenders at the point. And let's just call a spade a spade. If you're doing that, you are a biological man competing with other men at that point. But if you're a transgender female, you don't actually have to disclose where you're at. Rather, you just can show up and everything's going to be okay. Now, I think there's a lot of compromise. We're going to talk about that here in a few minutes on this, but I want you to see here is that so much of what they're talking about, and they even talk about this again, says regardless of the situation, we are a very flexible and inclusive organization. They may push back at me at this particular time and say things like, Bill, that's not what we mean by inclusion. And I just go, well, whoever wins the battle for the dictionary, wins the battle for this particular issue. And frankly, you don't get to determine what the notion of inclusion means as it relates to this whole issue of transgenderism. I hate to say it, but the transgender critical queer theorists have already beat you to the punch on this. So when they're pushing this ideology, what it really means is that if you want to be an inclusive organization, you are giving us not just race Marxism like the critical race theorists, but you're giving us queer Marxism, and you are only going to allow people who agree with this. Now you're going to say, well, I'm not going to kick anybody out that disagrees with me yet. You're not going to do it yet. Remember, it's like a train, this whole critical theory, and one cart leads to the other cart that leads to the other cart. And once you allow one end, the whole ideology requires that you allow all of them in. It's the old adage of once the camel's nose is under the tent before too long, the whole camel is going to be under and through the tent. And that's what I want you to see here is that critical race theory seeks to make racism apparent, but they do this through the study of critical consciousness so that you see your hidden racism. Namely, the new heightened consciousness allows you to see the greater realities of racism that you never saw in the past. Well, similarly, critical queer theory seeks to do this through the study of critical consciousness so that you can see your hidden bias against the LGBTQ movement. Namely, the new heightened consciousness gives you a greater understanding into the reality that is there. And once you have that heightened understanding of the reality that's there, you will intentionally only include those who buy into that particular ideology. And you say, well, this would never happen. Look at the American university system. Look at the banking system. Look at the world at large as it's bought into critical race theory. I'm telling you, it's doing the exact same thing as it relates to critical queer theory. Now, just to lay out what this is, just because people sometimes wonder, what in the world are you talking about? To give like the high theory talk of this whole approach goes back to is what one figure, James Lindsay, talks about, a Hermetic Gnosticism, namely like old Hermetic religions coming out of like Egypt and Alexandria, mixed with Hegelian concepts of knowledge and society. Think Frankfurt, Marcuse, and namely what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the right man with the right type of knowledge for the right society at the right time with the end goal of bringing about a communist revolution. This is their literature. If you say that I'm blowing this out of proportion, go read their literature. Read Ibram Kendi. Go read, all of the key figures from Marx and from, Marcuse and the Frankfurt School and all the other leading figures. Go read Kimberly Crenshaw and all the rest. And the net goal of all of this, the whole point of all of this, of this various push of race and gender Marxism, is that they intentionally seek to disrupt and dismantle all norms of Western society. So this means they want to disrupt and dismantle education. They want to disrupt and dismantle banking. They want to disrupt and dismantle jiu-jitsu tournaments. You see the point of how this whole operation works. So when Tap Cancer or any other organization is pushing this inclusive transgender third way approach, they are actually pushing a form of critical queer theory, which distinctly works to disrupt and dismantle accepted norms with the specific application of the accepted norms of gender. In fact, the whole idea of to queer something is to deny binary distinction. So you have male and female, and to queer it is to destroy the binary. That's the whole point. It's the disruption and the dismantling of clear, created binaries, men and women. So in short, what you have to see is that one must recognize that this agenda is far, far removed from the classic understandings of justice and fairness and the traditional definition of inclusion that we have been given. What we are seeing here is people who are denying the concept of truth, the real notion of male and female, real distinctions. And what they are trying to do is give you a queering of your organization because they want to disrupt and dismantle it for their own goals. So what you have to find is that when Tap Cancer and other organizations are doing this, their base, the people, the average person who does jiu-jitsu does not believe in this. They don't believe in it at all. In fact, they recognize the total absurdity of this particular movement. So if you want to ruin your organization, bring this in. Because mark my words, people are not going to give to this organization anymore. They're not going to send people to participate in this organization anymore because, you're going to say now, we're not going to allow transgender men to compete with biological women until you get the lawsuits because you're not going far enough the way the critical queer theorists want you to. Or when they do what they're doing on college campuses, and instead of having a protest, which is really just a form of, it's funny, protest within Marxism is like Marxist church. It's how they worship. It's literally what they strive to do to display their proper forms of worship in society. Like, call me crazy, but it's been there for generations. Read the particular literature. So now you say that until you can't appease them. Because remember, you don't appease Marxists, you reject Marxists. Your base is not going to go for this. And mark my words, people are going to pull out from your tournament. So, point 3, off of that little issue there. When any jiu-jitsu gym or tournament pushes this agenda, what you have to see is this, is that even in this modified form, this third way form, they are in essence forcing you to buy into this novice philosophy, how reality is supposed to exist, how you come to knowledge of the world, and how you should live as a social ethic in this particular world. They're doing it all under the guise of inclusion. And when they're doing this, or under the guise of inclusion, they're actually excluding your ability to disagree with this ideology overtaking Western society. And here's what I mean by this. This type of approach where they act like we're doing a good thing, but in reality, they are doing another, is a classic example of gaslighting you and manipulating you that they may push groups and organizations in a particular direction. In fact, this is the classic historical way that they have done this to push whole countries, whole organizations, and whole groups in a particular direction. And you look at it, you know, when you look at classic Marxism, you know, we have the proletariat and we have the bourgeois. And, you know, the proletariat, the people who were poor would look at the bourgeois and they would have this whole, you know, oh, we're not going to be for this. We're for these particular ideals. And what did they do? You had two different groups that were pitted against one another. You had victimhood and you had liberation that could be brought about with them. And they created so much tension between them that the liberation was the particular revolution that they were calling for. And this is, you know, something that we've recognized in the West. It's what is known as American Maoism. And it best captures this because what they're doing is that they're using rhetorical tactics in order to force you or bully you into buying into the particular agenda. And American Maoism also goes beyond this. They use the not so nice tactics, such as public struggle sessions, like protests at your particular jiu-jitsu event or at your particular jiu-jitsu academy, or flooding your particular organization with all of this in order to get you to crack and bend in a particular direction. Notice there's two ways. They can do it a nice way, or they can use public struggle sessions to shame you. So let me give you an example of this. So if a particular jiu-jitsu organization tried to do this, you're going to see this. They're going to say, see, there are two groups of people out there. You have inclusive jiu-jitsu and you have exclusive jiu-jitsu. You know, one is for the inclusion of all people, which is, of course, they're self-righteous people. And the other one is not, which is like the sane, rational person. And what they're going to say is that if you disagree with their view, you are fill in the blank. Maybe you're a racist, sexist, bigoted, homophobe, whatever it is. Whereas we are more open. But what I want you to notice this, notice what's going on. They're not open. They're not inclusive in the classic senses of the term. They're rejecting all that you stand for and all that you have fought for if you do not go along with this ridiculous ideology. In addition to it, they're actually very exclusive because they are pushing a theory that will only include those who buy into this particular ideology. And they'll say, well, we're not doing it now. Yeah, yet. See what's going on at Columbia and Harvard and Yale and these other organizations. If they can do it there, why can't they do it with you? So in addition to it, they will try and use things such as we're more compassionate, or, you know, we try to be loving and inclusive, virtue signaling their various righteousness to shame you if you do not go along with them. Realize what this is. It's classic American Maoism. And I want to illustrate this. I want to show you here with a video of a friend of mine. Her name is Chi Van Fleet, and she talks about this in greater detail. And I want you to see it. Sorry, let me pull it up here. She says this, notice.
I've been very alarmed about what's going on in our school. You are now training our children to be social justice warriors and to loathe our country and our history. Growing up in Mao's China, all this seemed very familiar. The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race. During the Cultural Revolution, I witnessed students and teachers turn against each other. We changed school names to be politically correct. We were taught to denounce our heritage. The Red Guards destroy anything that is not communist, old statues, books, and anything else. We are also encouraged to report on each other, just like the Student Equity Ambassador Program and the bias reporting system. This is indeed the American version of the Chinese Cultural Revolution. The critical race theory has its roots in cultural Marxism. It should have no place in our schools.
And it should have no place in our schools, and critical queer theory should have no place in our jiu-jitsu tournaments. And what I want you to realize is I want to recommend this book titled The Queering of the American Child, How a New School Religious Cult Poisons the Minds and Bodies of Normal Kids. And this is my fear of what's going on in our jiu-jitsu academies. So let's move on for one more. Any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym or tournament must realize you can never appease the woke, the transgender woke, or the LGBTQ plus agenda. First of all, you can never appease cultural Marxists unless you completely give up your power to any of them. They will never stop pushing their agenda. So you have this third way approach. Okay, well, that's not enough. They don't want just a third way approach. They want total domination of your particular organization. So once you give up your power, your organization, etc., whatever it is, you're never going to get it back. That's how these particular people work. So what you need to realize is that second, even though you tried to make a qualified view on this issue, it is internally incoherent, functionally contradictory, and it will never appease the LGBTQ plus community. So before I get into this, I want to talk about one other aspect as it relates to it. It's funny how we're willing to do it on this particular issue. Like it's socially acceptable at this particular point to do it on this particular issue. And I had an individual, he was actually like a mentor of mine, and he was a former judge now at this point. And he used to say that, you know, the law never tries to get too far ahead of the people. And we realize that if we push something too quickly and too hard, it's going to be rejected, and then they're not going to get their agendas through. And if you look at it, the reason that transgenderism is able to be pushed right now is because, you know, the LGBT, transgenderism, the queering aspect, these are acceptable by really just broad, you know, society, whatever that means. Actually, not the broad group of people. It's just socially acceptable. It's sort of the virtue signaling thing of the day right now. But why are they not talking about the plus? And the plus has historically been, look at other countries, look at their literature. It's been the whole pedophilia issue. Are we going to allow that within our jiu-jitsu community? People who are recognizing that as their understanding of transgenderism and queering and sexuality. Are we willing to do that? And you go, oh, we would never get there. Yeah, it's because the law never gets ahead of where the ideology is at. Could you have even fathomed that we would be talking about this 25 years ago? The point is that these movements work inch by inch, foot by foot for the goal of total domination. And that's why I say this whole third way approach that this group is using here, it's internally incoherent. First of all, your concepts of inclusion are incoherent, utterly incoherent, because you fundamentally redefine the meaning of the terms. That's what we've already shown. You're not saying you want all different people there. What you're fundamentally saying is that you're only going to include this particular ideology. That's what inclusion means in the translations of wokish, to look at James Lindsay. In addition, you're functionally contradictory. If you buy into transgenderism and gender fluidity, what you have to recognize is that you recognize the distinction between men and women by the very sheer fact that you have a men and women's bracket. Notice this. On the one hand, we recognize the fundamental difference between a man and a woman. On the other hand, we are functionally contradictory and functionally incoherent because we're going to allow a group of people who don't associate with their biological sex at this point. Do you not see the contradiction in this? You have your cake over here and you want to eat it too. My point is that you make this odd category where men must be sort of notified or recognized as women, even though they are not. First of all, this doesn't mean that you inherently trust them. Notice this. You don't really trust these people, to be honest, because first of all, you're going to exclude them if they don't tell you this. Second of all, you're discriminating against them because normal people don't have to do this. Only the transgender people have to do this. So notice what's going to happen here. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen. I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen in the jiu-jitsu community on this. Every time that they have to go and notify you about why they're transgender or that they're transgender or whatever it is, they're going to say, you don't require this of all the different people. The men don't have to do this. The women don't have to do this. Only we have to do this. So this third way approach, even though you think you're getting around something, it's actually going to be tried as a discriminatory process against these particular people. Notice this. You can never appease them. This modified view will never be enough. They want full control. They will use your third way approach, which ironically, if you want to just speak about it in high theory again, which is Hegel's dialectical approach, they're going to use this horizontal thing for the vertical goal of taking over your organization as a means of saying you're discriminating against them and they're going to sue you for it. In addition, you might as well take the high ground now and not bend your knee. And you shouldn't destroy logic and create a functionally contradictory process within your organization. Namely, don't appease gender Marxists and cultural Marxism. You're never going to win. They will always find a way to disrupt and dismantle your organization. You have to reject them. You have to push back against their ideology. And any jiu-jitsu gym, tournament, school, organization that doesn't do this will ultimately lose the long battle. My fifth point. Any jiu-jitsu gym or tournament must realize there are more things to consider in life than inclusion. First of all, the history and legacy of Brazilian jiu-jitsu are opposed to such vain ideologies. Many Brazilians fought against Marxism. Historically, you see many of the battles that took place within Brazil, many of the things that they fought to get away from, many of the reasons that they came to America is so that they wouldn't see their lives utterly wrecked by Marxism. And then they come here and they have queer Marxism shoved down their throats. Realize this, the whole point of jiu-jitsu, what is that we're grounded in reality. We are a fighting combat sport, not given off in some esoteric notion. We're grounded and rooted in reality, and our roots and the people of who we are a reality-based people who fought Marxism and need to continue to fight it here. In addition to it, science is science and biology is biology, and your ideologies don't become biology. They're still just your opinion, but your opinions don't make facts. Facts don't care about your feelings don't make science, and science is determined by the biology of who a particular person is. In addition to this is another thing that we need to think, and I know I'm piling this on here. In real life, if a Brazilian jiu-jitsu fighter saw a woman get into a fight with a man, I know what he would do. Any good jiu-jitsu fighter worth his weight, he would go over there and he would stop the assault that's taking place. Why? Because we recognize both inherent to human nature and to the nature of a true protector who is a genuine martial artist. We protect women. But this whole approach, this whole transgender approach, not only does it undermine the historic understandings of what it means to be a man protecting a woman, it also undermines the truism of the fact that men are to be there as the people who enforce this in society. Let me put it another way. If we buy into this whole gender dysphoria concepts, we're in essence saying, we think that it's wrong for men to beat up women unless we put them in a gi and we put them in a jiu-jitsu tournament. Really? Reality is reality everywhere, not where you just want it to be. Reality is reality on the streets and in the academy and in the jiu-jitsu tournaments. Your opinions don't become facts, and a woman doesn't cease to be abused by a man or beaten by a man just because she puts a gi on and signs up for your particular tournament. In addition to it, very practically speaking here, men can do and will injure a woman in a competition. They've got the strength, the ego, the pride to do such a thing. You're not protecting women. You are setting them up not only for failure, but for serious injuries. In addition to it, you are fundamentally attacking women's rights. If a person can just become a woman by identifying as a woman, then real women have relative rights, not absolute rights. Frankly, what we have to realize is that there's no such thing as a relative right. A right is a right only if it's universal and absolute. And frankly, women fought far too long and far too hard for their rights to be removed by such foolishness, whether it's in the jiu-jitsu community or in society at large. And this is what I ultimately want to finish with. I want you to realize that if you're going to do this, if you're going to go down this with your organization or with your tournaments, you will utterly ruin your organizations. People will stop competing at them. Your tournaments are gonna go broke. As the old saying is, go woke, go broke. It's a real thing. And I want you to realize you have been warned. So what should the jiu-jitsu community do this? Realize You cannot appease the woke. It is not enough to just promise that a transgender will not fight against a biological female. We cannot allow this into our sport. There is no third way on this particular issue. We cannot negotiate with Marxist ideologies. They are viruses that seek to destroy every particular body that they come in contact with, including the jiu-jitsu community.
Your rights are my responsibility. A man has to decide that he's going to do something. I'm not listening to your stupid classes.